The transport ship Valkyrie groaned as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull scarred by countless jumps across the galaxy. Marcus Chun pressed his face against the small viewport, watching as the massive space station Nexus Prime grew larger in the distance. The structure was a marvel of alien engineering, a twisted spiral of metal and crystal that housed over 50 million beings from across the known galaxy. "First time seeing the Prime?" asked Zek, the Vorthack pilot who had been kind enough to give Marcus passage. The reptilian alien scales shifted from green to a curious yellow as he spoke. Marcus nodded, still staring at the station. "I've heard stories, but seeing it..." He trailed off, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. Zektha's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was amusement. "Wait until you see the inside, human. Your kind is still new to the Galactic Council. Most species barely know you exist." That was putting it mildly. Humanity had only made first contact 3 years ago when a damaged human exploration vessel had stumbled into Vorthack space. The subsequent negotiations had been difficult. Earth was classified as a pre-industrial world by galactic standards, despite humanity's recent achievements in space travel. The technology gap was simply too vast. As the Valkyrie approached the docking bay, Marcus couldn't help but feel small. Not just physically, though at 6 feet tall he was considered quite short by galactic standards, but in every way that mattered. Humans were weak, slow, and technologically primitive. They had no natural weapons, no enhanced senses, no psychic abilities. In a galaxy filled with species that had evolved on high-gravity worlds or in hostile environments, humans were seen as soft, fragile creatures barely worthy of notice. The docking procedure took 20 minutes, during which Marcus watched dozens of other ships coming and going. Massive cargo haulers piloted by the insectoid Clixtar, sleek patrol vessels crewed by the energy-based Luminari, and countless others representing species he couldn't even identify. "Remember," Zektha said as they prepared to disembark, "keep your head down. The Council granted your people observer status, but that doesn't mean everyone here will be friendly. Humans have a reputation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of reputation?" "Weak. Helpless. Some call your species the prey." Zektha's scales darkened with what Marcus recognized as embarrassment. "I don't agree, but that's the general opinion." The airlock hissed open, and Marcus stepped in a Nexus Prime for the first time. The corridors were vast, designed to accommodate species ranging from the tiny, bird-like trill to the massive, elephant-sized Gorthons. The walls were lined with translation matrices that automatically converted alien speech into his neural implant, allowing him to understand the dozens of languages being spoken around him. Marcus had been assigned quarters in Section 7, one of the lower-tier residential areas typically reserved for junior diplomats and visiting scholars. As he made his way through the station, he became acutely aware of the stares he attracted. Most were curious, some dismissive, and a few openly hostile. He passed a group of Clixtar traders, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lights. One of them, noticing Marcus, made a series of clicking sounds that his translator rendered as, "Look, it's one of the new prey species. I heard they can't even survive on most worlds without artificial atmosphere." Another Clixtar responded, "I heard they have no natural weapons at all. How did such a weak species even develop space travel?" Marcus kept walking, his jaw tight. He'd been warned this would happen, but it still stung. 3 years since first contact, and this was how humanity was seen by the galaxy at large. His quarters were small, but functional, with a basic replicator for food and a communication terminal linked to the station's central network. Marcus dropped his single bag on the narrow bed and activated the terminal. A holographic interface materialized, displaying the station's directory. The Galactic Council was in session, discussing trade disputes between the Hegemony Worlds and the Free Systems Alliance. As an observer, Marcus had no voting rights, but he was allowed to attend and learn. Earth's government had sent him here with simple instructions: watch, listen, and report back on galactic politics. The next morning, Marcus made his way to the council chambers. The room was enormous, with tiered seating that rose in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the seats, their various environmental suits and breathing apparatus creating a bizarre but fascinating spectacle. Marcus found his assigned seat in the observer section, wedged between a luminary diplomat whose energy form shimmered like contained lightning and a sleeping Gorathan whose snores rumbled through the chamber. The current speaker was a Vekhari admiral named HFY Sci-Fi, his blue-scaled face twisted with anger as he addressed the assembly. "The human question must be resolved," he declared, his voice booming through the translation system. "We cannot continue to pretend that this primitive species deserves a place among the civilized races." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized he was about to become the subject of debate. "The humans have done nothing to prove their worth," HFY Sci-Fi continued. "They cannot survive in normal galactic environments. They have no natural defenses. Their technology is centuries behind our most basic systems. And yet, the Council granted them observer status based solely on their novelty." A Clickstar representative rose to speak, her mandibles clicking rapidly. "The humans are a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. They require special accommodations for everything: atmosphere, gravity, temperature. They are weak prey animals that somehow stumbled into space." Marcus clenched his fists as speaker after speaker rose to denounce humanity. The common themes were always the same. Humans were weak, primitive, and unworthy of even their current limited status in galactic society. Finally, a tall, elegant figure rose from the prime seats. This was Council Speaker Veltar, a Ashani whose crystalline body refracted light in beautiful patterns as she moved. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The human question has been raised," she said, her words causing the chamber to fall silent. "Perhaps it is time we settled this matter definitively. I propose a trial." The word trial sent a chill through Marcus. In galactic law, trials weren't legal proceedings. They were tests of worthiness, often with permanent consequences for the species involved. "What manner of trial do you propose, Speaker?" asked the Vekhari admiral, his eyes glinting with anticipation. "A hunt," Veltar replied simply. The chamber erupted in excited chatter. The hunt was a legendary trial, reserved for situations where a species' very right to exist in galactic society was questioned. It hadn't been called in over 1,000 years. "The rules are ancient but clear," Veltar continued once order was restored. "A single representative from the questioned species must survive on Keth Mora for 30 standard days. They may bring only basic supplies, no advanced weapons, no communication devices, no outside assistance. If they survive, their species earns full recognition and protection under galactic law. If they fail," she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew the consequences of failure. Humanity would be classified as a protected but primitive species, essentially wards of the galaxy with no rights or autonomy. Admiral Scar's scaled face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Keth Mora is perfect. The humans will finally learn their place." Marcus felt sick. Keth Mora was a death world, one of the most hostile environments in known space. Its gravity was 3 times Earth standard, the atmosphere was barely breathable even for most galactic species, and it was home to some of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. It was where the Council sent criminals for execution by exposure. "The human observer may choose to decline," Speaker Veltar said, turning her crystalline gaze toward Marcus. "Though such a choice would automatically result in humanity's reclassification as a protected species." Marcus stood slowly, feeling the weight of thousands of alien eyes upon him. His mouth was dry, his heart pounding, but he knew he had no real choice. If he refused, humanity's future in galactic society would be over before it had truly begun. "I accept," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its tremor. A ripple of surprise ran through the assembly. Most had expected the human to refuse immediately. Very well, Speaker Veltar declared. The hunt will begin in 7 standard days. The human will be transported to Kethmora with basic supplies and emergency beacon. Survival for 30 days will prove humanity's worth to join our community. As the session ended and the various delegates began to file out, Marcus remained in his seat, overwhelmed by what had just happened. In one moment of pride and stubbornness, he had just committed himself to what was essentially a death sentence. That was either very brave or very stupid, said a voice beside him. Marcus turned to see a Vorthak female with intricate scale patterns marking her as military. I am Commander Velnara of the Vorthak Defense Fleet. I knew your pilot friend Zektha. He spoke well of humans. Thank you, Marcus managed. I think. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Is there any chance any human has ever survived something like Kethmora? Velnara's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue that Marcus had learned indicated serious thought. No human has ever been tested like this, she said finally. But there are stories. Old stories about a species that seemed weak but proved otherwise when pressed. They called them the Quiet Ones, a species that appeared harmless until threatened. What happened to them? They became the most feared warriors in galactic history, Velnara replied softly. But those are just legends, ancient myths. As she walked away, Marcus sat alone in the empty chamber, staring at the central platform where his fate had been decided. 7 days to prepare for a trial that no one expected him to survive. 7 days to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. The weight of an entire species' future rested on his shoulders, and everyone in the galaxy was betting against him. But Marcus Chun had never been one to back down from a fight, even when the odds were impossible. Especially then, he stood and walked toward the exit, his mind already racing with plans. He had 7 days to learn everything he could about Kethmora and its dangers. 7 days to prepare for a hunt where he would be both predator and prey. The galaxy saw humans as weak, helpless creatures unworthy of respect. In 7 days, Marcus would either prove them right or show them just how wrong they could be. The hunt was about to begin, and the galaxy had no idea what it had unleashed. Marcus spent the next 6 days in the station's archives, absorbing every piece of information about Kethmora that he could find. The planet was a nightmare of hostile environments, crushing gravity, thin atmosphere filled with toxic compounds, extreme temperature variations, and an ecosystem designed around predation and survival of the most ruthless. The archive files painted a grim picture. Kethmora's surface was primarily composed of jagged crystalline formations and dense, poisonous jungles. The planet's 3 suns created a day-night cycle that lasted roughly 18 Earth hours, during which temperatures could swing from freezing to over 50 degrees Celsius. The gravity was 2.8 times Earth standard, enough to cripple most species within hours. But it was the fauna that truly made Kethmora legendary among the galaxy's death worlds. The Skelvrak were the apex predators, 12-foot-tall, reptilian hunters with natural camouflage that made them nearly invisible. They possessed echolocation capabilities that could detect heartbeats from hundreds of meters away, and their claws could slice through most metals. The archives noted that even heavily armed Klixtar hunting parties avoided areas where Skelvrak had been detected. Then, there were the Thornling's carnivorous plant-animal hybrids that could remain motionless for weeks before striking. Their root systems could extend for kilometers underground, allowing them to coordinate attacks across vast areas. Even experienced galactic military units had been wiped out by Thornling ambushes. The Void Crawlers lived in the planet's extensive cave systems, blind creatures that hunted by detecting thermal signatures and vibrations. Their acid spit could dissolve organic matter in seconds, and they traveled in packs of up to 50 individuals. Marcus rubbed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. Everything he read made his situation seem more hopeless. How was he supposed to survive 30 days in an environment that killed trained warriors from the galaxy's most formidable military species? Studying for your death. Marcus turned to find Admiral Tetris Siskar standing behind him, the Vekhari's blue scales gleaming under the archive's lights. His tone carried casual mockery, as if he were discussing the weather. Preparing to survive, Marcus replied evenly. Tetris Siskar's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was Vekhari laughter. Admirable delusion. Do you know how many of my own warriors I've lost to Keth Mora during training exercises? 43. And Vekhari are bred for combat, enhanced with military augmentations from birth. We can survive in hard vacuum for hours, and our claws can tear through armor plating. The Admiral moved closer, looming over Marcus with his 8-foot frame. You humans are soft, weak creatures who need perfect conditions just to survive. Your bones will shatter under Keth Mora's gravity within days. Your primitive lungs will burn from the atmospheric toxins within hours. Even if the predators ignore you, the environment itself will kill you slowly and painfully. Marcus stood to face the Admiral, though he barely reached the alien's chest. Then, why are you here? If you're so certain I'll fail, why waste time talking to me? Tetris Siskar's eyes narrowed. Because I want you to understand what you've done. Your foolish pride hasn't just doomed you. It's doomed your entire species. When you die screaming in Keth Mora's jungles, humanity will be classified as a protected species. You'll be pets, nothing more. Zoo animals for the amusement of your betters. We'll see, Marcus said quietly. The Admiral studied him for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Yes, he said over his shoulder, we will. Marcus returned to his research with renewed determination. He began focusing not just on the planet's dangers, but on its ecosystem as a whole. Every environment, no matter how hostile, had patterns and weaknesses that could be exploited by someone clever enough to find them. He learned that the Skelvrak, despite their fearsome reputation, were largely solitary hunters except during mating season. They were also highly territorial, meaning that finding evidence of one Skelvrak's territory would indicate safety from others in that area. The Thornlings required specific soil compositions to take root, and their distribution followed predictable geological patterns. More importantly, they were vulnerable to fire. Their plant-like aspects made them extremely flammable despite their predatory nature. The void crawlers never emerged during the day, staying deep in their cave systems until darkness fell. Their thermal vision was actually a weakness as much as a strength. They had difficulty distinguishing between different heat sources and could be confused by temperature manipulation. On his final day of preparation, Marcus made his way to the station's supply depot. The hunt's rules allowed him basic survival gear, a standard atmospheric rebreather, emergency rations for 10 days, basic tools, and one weapon of his choosing. No advanced technology, no communication devices beyond an emergency beacon that would only activate after 30 days or in case of his death. The weapon selection was crucial. Most galactic species would choose plasma rifles or molecular disruptors, but Marcus had a different idea. He selected an item that made the depot commander, a gruff Gorathan named Torek, grunt with amusement. A primitive projectile weapon, Torek rumbled, his massive tusks gleaming as he spoke. Human, this fires simple metal slugs. It won't even scratch a Skelvrak's hide. It'll do, Marcus replied, checking the weapon's balance. The assault rifle was actually one of Earth's finest military weapons, chambered in 7.62 millimeters NATO. The galactic powers might see it as primitive, but Marcus knew its capabilities intimately. And this ammunition request, Torek continued, reading from Marcus's supply list. 300 rounds? What do you plan to do? Wage war? Something like that, Marcus said, accepting the sealed ammo containers. That evening, Marcus sat in his quarters, field stripping and cleaning his rifle for the third time. The familiar ritual was comforting, a connection to his past that the aliens couldn't understand or take away from him. His military background was something he'd kept quiet since arriving at Nexus Prime. Most galactic species saw warfare as a regrettable necessity, something to be conducted efficiently and without emotional investment. The idea that humans had not only mastered warfare, but had elevated it to an art form would have been incomprehensible to them. Marcus had served 8 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, including 3 tours in hostile environments that had taught him more about survival than any classroom ever could. He'd learned to track enemies through dense jungle, to live off the land for weeks at a time, and to turn everyday objects into lethal weapons when necessary. More importantly, he'd learned something that no alien species seemed to understand. Humans didn't just adapt to hostile environments, they thrived in them. Earth itself was a death world by galactic standards, a high-gravity planet with extreme weather, dangerous fauna, and an atmosphere so corrosive that most alien species require protective gear just to visit. Humans had evolved not as the dominant predators of their world, but as persistence hunters. They didn't need to be the strongest or fastest. They just needed to be smart enough and stubborn enough to outlast anything that tried to kill them. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. Marcus opened it to find Commander Volnara, her scales showing the deep blue of concern. "I wanted to wish you luck," she said, stepping into his quarters. "And to give you this." She handed him a small data crystal. "Unofficial survey data from Keth Mora. My people conducted a study there 50 years ago. It's incomplete, but it might help." Marcus pocketed the crystal gratefully. "Why are you helping me?" Velnara's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a pattern Marcus didn't recognize. "Because I've studied your species more than most. Your military history, your exploration records, your survival capabilities. The galaxy sees weakness where I see potential." "Potential for what?" "To change everything," she said simply. "The galactic powers have grown complacent. They've become so focused on technology and inherited advantages that they've forgotten what it means to actually fight for survival. If you succeed on Keth Mora, you'll remind them of something they've lost." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "There's something else you should know. Admiral HFY Sci-Fi has placed a substantial wager on your failure. He's not the only one. Most of the Council expects you to be dead within 72 hours. And you?" Volnara's scales shifted to what Marcus had learned was the Vorthack equivalent of a smile. "I've bet everything I have on your survival. Don't make me regret it." After she left, Marcus loaded the data crystal into his terminal. The Vorthack survey data was indeed incomplete, but it revealed something interesting: patterns in predator behavior that suggested hidden areas of relative safety on Keth Mora's surface. Small zones where the various apex predators seemed to avoid, possibly due to environmental factors or territorial boundaries. More importantly, the data showed evidence of ancient structures scattered across the planet's surface. Ruins from a long-dead civilization that might provide shelter or resources. The Galactic Archives made no mention of these ruins. Apparently, they'd been deemed irrelevant to the planet's current ecosystem. Marcus studied the data until his eyes burned, memorizing topographical maps and predator movement patterns. He traced potential routes through the hostile terrain, identifying locations that might serve as temporary shelters or supply caches. By the time he finally forced himself to sleep, he had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't much, more of a framework for improvisation than a detailed strategy, but it was something. His final morning on Nexus Prime arrived gray and cold, the station's artificial weather system reflecting the mood of its inhabitants. Word of the hunt had spread throughout the station, and Marcus found himself the center of unwanted attention as he made his way to the departure bay. Some aliens watched with curiosity, others with pity, and a few with barely concealed excitement. For most galactic species, the idea of a hunt was entertainment, a chance to watch a primitive creature struggle against impossible odds. The transport vessel Death's Edge was a sleek Ashani design, its crystalline hull pulsing with contained energy. Captain Zithlara, the ship's commander, greeted Marcus with professional courtesy that couldn't quite hide her skepticism. "I've transported many beings to Keth Mora," she said as they departed Nexus Prime. Warriors, criminals, researchers. None of them were as calm as you appear to be. Fear doesn't help with preparation, Marcus replied, watching the stars stretch into lines as they entered hyperspace. True, Zethlara agreed. But neither does false confidence. Keth Mora has killed beings far more dangerous than yourself. I'm sure it has, Marcus said. But it's never killed a human. The journey to Keth Mora took 18 hours, during which Marcus continued to study and prepare. He reviewed everything he knew about the planet's ecosystems, predator behaviors, and environmental hazards. He practiced field stripping his rifle until he could do it blindfolded, and ran through combat scenarios in his mind. Most importantly, he thought about what Commander Valnara had said. The galactic powers had grown complacent, comfortable in their technological superiority and inherited advantages. They'd forgotten what it meant to fight for survival with nothing but intelligence, determination, and the refusal to give up. Humanity had never had that luxury. Earth's history was written in blood and struggle. Countless generations of humans who had faced impossible odds and found ways to overcome them. Not through superior technology or natural advantages, but through pure, stubborn refusal to lie down and die. As they dropped out of hyperspace and Keth Mora filled the view screen, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected: anticipation. The planet below was indeed a hellish landscape of twisted terrain and hostile environments, but it was also an opportunity. For the first time since humanity had made contact with galactic civilization, one of his species would have the chance to show what they were truly capable of. Not as weak prey animals begging for scraps from their technological superiors, but as the persistent hunters they had always been. The galaxy expected him to die screaming in Keth Mora's jungles within days. Marcus Chun planned to disappoint them. The drop pod slammed into Keth Mora's surface with crushing force, its impact craters smoking in the thin, toxic atmosphere. Marcus lay still for several minutes, letting his body adjust to the planet's crushing gravity before attempting to move. Every breath burned his lungs despite the atmospheric rebreather, and his bones ached under the relentless downward pull. When he finally forced himself to stand, the simple act required tremendous effort. The gravity here was 2.8 times Earth standard, making his rifle feel like it weighed 50 pounds instead of 8. His pack, loaded with 10 days of emergency rations and basic supplies, felt like a crushing burden. But Marcus had trained in high-gravity environments before. The core had facilities that could simulate up to 3G, and while it was never comfortable, he knew his body could adapt. The key was to move slowly, conserve energy, and let his muscles adjust gradually to the increased load. The landscape around him was exactly as the archives had described, a twisted hellscape of jagged crystal formations and dense alien vegetation. The trees, if they could be called that, were massive constructs of what looked like living metal, their branches extending in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ground was covered with a carpet of purple-black moss that released small puffs of spores with each step. Marcus checked his equipment and began moving toward the coordinates he'd memorized from the Vorthack survey data. According to their information, there should be ruins about 3 kilometers north of his landing site, ancient structures that might provide shelter and concealment while he got his bearings. The journey took 4 hours through terrain that would have been challenging even in Earth gravity. The crystalline formations created a maze of sharp-edged passages and blind corners, while the alien vegetation seemed designed to snag, cut, or poison anything that brushed against it. Marcus had to stop frequently to rest, his body already pushed to its limits by the hostile environment. But he was alive, and that was more than most galactic observers had expected. The betting pools on Nexus Prime had given him less than 12 hours before environmental factors alone would kill him. The ruins, when he finally found them, were unlike anything in galactic archives. The structures were built from the same crystalline material as the natural formations, but shaped and arranged with obvious intelligence. Hexagonal chambers connected by narrow passages. The entire complex partially overgrown by the alien vegetation, but still structurally sound. Marcus selected a chamber deep within the complex, one with multiple exit routes and a clear view of the surrounding area. He began the methodical process of establishing a base camp, checking for predator sign, setting up early warning systems with his limited supplies, and creating defensive positions. The first night on Kethmora was a lesson in terror. As the planet's 3 suns set, the temperature plummeted from scorching heat to bitter cold within minutes. Marcus had constructed a crude shelter within the ruins, but the thin atmosphere provided little insulation. He found himself shivering despite his thermal gear, every breath visible in the frigid air. But cold was the least of his problems. The sounds began just after full darkness fell. Alien calls echoed across the crystalline landscape. Hunting cries, territorial disputes, and the screams of things being killed in the darkness. Marcus lay in his shelter, rifle ready, listening to the symphony of death that surrounded him. Something large moved past his position around midnight. Marcus caught only a glimpse through his shelter's entrance, a shadow darker than the surrounding blackness, at least 12 feet long and moving with predatory grace. The archives had mentioned the Skelvrak, but seeing one in person was an entirely different experience. The creature's natural camouflage made it almost impossible to track visually, and it moved with complete silence despite its size. Marcus held his breath as the predator paused near his shelter, its head turning back and forth as if searching for something. For several terrifying minutes, he was certain it had detected him. Then, with no warning, the creature moved on, disappearing into the crystal maze as silently as it had appeared. The rest of the night passed without incident, but Marcus didn't sleep. He used the time to study his surroundings through his rifle's scope, memorizing the terrain and looking for patterns in predator movement. By dawn, he had identified at least 3 different species moving through the area, each following predictable patrol routes around their territories. Day 2 brought new challenges. Marcus needed water, and his emergency supplies wouldn't last more than a few days in the thin air and extreme temperatures. The Vortex survey data had indicated a water source about 2 kilometers west of the ruins, but reaching it would mean crossing open ground during daylight hours when aerial predators were most active. Marcus spent the morning observing the area through his scope, timing the movements of the flying creatures he could see in the distance. They appeared to follow regular hunting patterns, with roughly 30-minute intervals between passes over any given area. He made his move during what he calculated to be the safest window, moving quickly but carefully across the exposed terrain. The gravity made every step an effort, but his marine training had taught him to push through physical discomfort. Pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. The water source turned out to be a natural spring flowing from a crack in the crystalline bedrock. The water was clear, but had a metallic taste that suggested high mineral content. Marcus filled his containers and added purification tablets, hoping they would be effective against any alien pathogens. On his way back to the ruins, Marcus encountered his first thornling. He almost walked directly into it. The creature had positioned itself along what appeared to be a natural path through the crystal formations, its plant-like appearance making it nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding vegetation. Only his combat instincts, honed by years of training and deployment, saved him. Something about the plant in front of him looked wrong, too symmetrical, too perfectly positioned. Marcus froze, studying it carefully through his scope. It took him several minutes to identify the predator's true nature. What he had initially taken for branches and leaves were actually specialized limbs and sensory organs, all arranged to create the perfect ambush position. The thornling's root system was visible if you knew what to look for, subtle ridges in the moss carpet that extended in all directions from the creature's central position. According to the archives, these root networks could coordinate attacks across vast distances, meaning that disturbing one thornling could trigger responses from dozens of others. Marcus backed away carefully, taking a longer route back to the ruins. He had learned something valuable. The alien predators were perfectly adapted to their environment, but they followed patterns that could be observed and understood. The key to survival wasn't superior firepower or advanced technology. It was patience, observation, and the ability to think like both predator and prey. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine. He would spend the early morning hours observing and mapping predator movements, noting changes in behavior, and identifying safe corridors through the hostile terrain. Midday was for necessary tasks like water collection and equipment maintenance, always planned around the feeding patterns of aerial predators. Afternoons were devoted to expanding his knowledge of the local ecosystem. Marcus discovered that many of the crystal formations contained hollows and passages that could provide concealment, while certain types of alien vegetation were actually beneficial, producing compounds that seemed to mask human scent from predators. But it was on day 7 that Marcus encountered his first real test. He was returning from a scouting expedition when he heard the sound, a low, rhythmic clicking that the archives had described as skelvrak hunting calls. The massive predator was tracking something, and based on the direction and intensity of the calls, that something was him. Marcus found concealment in a cluster of crystal formations and began the deadly game of cat and mouse that would define his time on Kethmora. The skelvrak was patient, methodical, and completely adapted to hunting in this environment. But it had never encountered a human before, and that unfamiliarity would prove to be Marcus's greatest advantage. The predator's echolocation was incredibly sophisticated, but it was calibrated to detect the species it normally hunted. Marcus's human physiology, his unique cardiovascular signature, his specific bone density, his particular breathing patterns, were outside the creature's normal parameters. It knew something was in the area, but it couldn't quite lock onto his exact position. For 3 hours, Marcus played a deadly game of hide and seek with the apex predator. He used every trick he'd learned during his military service, controlling his breathing, moving only when background noise would mask his sounds, and positioning himself so that the crystal formations would break up his thermal signature. The skelvrak grew increasingly frustrated as its usual hunting methods failed to locate the elusive prey. Marcus watched through his scope as the 12-foot predator stalked back and forth, its camouflaged hide shifting color to match the surrounding terrain. The creature was magnificent in its deadliness, a perfect killing machine evolved over millions of years. But evolution was a game that humans have been playing for a very long time. Finally, the skelvrak made a mistake. In its frustration, it exposed itself while moving between concealment positions, presenting Marcus with a clear shot at its head. A single 7.62 millimeters round, properly placed, penetrated the creature's skull and dropped it instantly. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the crystal landscape like thunder, immediately followed by answering calls from other predators in the area. Marcus had announced his presence to every dangerous creature within kilometers, but he had also proven something important. Human technology, even primitive human technology, was perfectly capable of killing galactic apex predators. Marcus quickly field-dressed the skelvrak, taking meat for food and studying the creature's anatomy. The predator's hide was incredibly tough, its muscles dense and powerful, its sensory organs far more sophisticated than anything Earth had produced. But it was still a biological organism, and biological organisms had vulnerabilities. More importantly, Marcus now understood something that the galactic observers didn't. He wasn't just surviving on Kethmora. He was adapting to it. Every day, every encounter, every small victory was teaching him something new about this world and its dangers. He was becoming something that Kethmora had never seen before, a human predator learning to hunt in an alien ecosystem. The betting pools on Nexus Prime had given him less than a week to live. As Marcus carved steaks from his first kill and prepared to smoke them over a carefully concealed fire, he realized he was going to disappoint a lot of people. But the real test was yet to come. Word of his survival would eventually reach the other predators on Keth Mora, and they would adapt their hunting strategies accordingly. The planet would throw everything it had at him, testing not just his ability to survive, but his capacity to evolve and overcome. Marcus Chun had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, even if he hadn't known it. Every challenge he'd faced, every hardship he'd overcome, every lesson learned in the Corps had been building toward this. A human alone on a death world, proving to the galaxy that his species was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The hunt was just beginning. By day 15, Marcus had become something that Keth Mora had never seen before, a human apex predator. His body had adapted to the crushing gravity with surprising efficiency. What had initially felt like bone-crushing weight now seemed merely heavy. His muscles had strengthened, his cardiovascular system had adjusted, and his movements had gained a fluid efficiency that conserved energy while maintaining lethal capability. More importantly, his mind had adapted to think like Keth Mora's native predators. Marcus crouched in his latest observation post, a crystal formation overlooking a natural clearing where several predator territories intersected. His rifle rested steady against a makeshift bipod, scope trained on a cluster of thornlings that had been stalking a pack of grazing creatures called Morthek. The thornlings thought they were perfectly concealed, their plant-like camouflage nearly flawless among the alien vegetation. But Marcus had learned to see past their disguises. He understood their positioning patterns, their coordination signals, their hunting methodologies. More importantly, he had learned to exploit their weaknesses. Fire was the key. The thornlings' plant-like aspects made them incredibly vulnerable to combustion, and Marcus had discovered that certain combinations of local vegetation produced highly flammable compounds when properly prepared. A single incendiary round could turn a thornling ambush into a raging inferno. But Marcus wasn't hunting thornlings today. He was studying them, learning from their techniques, and applying those lessons to his own survival strategies. The alien predators were master strategists, capable of coordinating complex ambushes across vast distances through their route networks. Marcus had begun incorporating similar principles into his own defensive preparations. His base camp had evolved far beyond the simple shelter he'd initially constructed. The ruins now housed an intricate network of observation posts, concealed weapon caches, and escape routes. Marcus had learned to use the crystal formation's natural acoustics to create an early warning system that could detect approaching predators from kilometers away. He had also learned to hunt like a Keth Mora native. The Morthek grazing in the clearing below were six-legged creatures about the size of earth cattle, but with thick armored hides and sensory organs that could detect movement across incredible distances. They were prey animals, but they were prey animals that had evolved on a death world, making them far more dangerous than their Earth equivalents. Marcus had been tracking this particular herd for 3 days, learning their feeding patterns, their alert behaviors, their escape routes. He had identified the dominant male, a massive specimen with scarred hide that spoke of numerous encounters with predators. That animal would be his target, but not through direct confrontation. Instead, Marcus employed a hunting technique that no galactic predator had ever developed: patience combined with technological precision. He waited until the Morthek entered a specific section of the clearing, one he had prepared with carefully placed charges made from crystallized tree sap and salvaged components from his drop pod. The explosives weren't powerful enough to seriously harm the armored creatures, but they would create noise, confusion, and, most importantly, redirect the herd escape route directly toward Marcus's position. The plan worked perfectly. The controlled detonations sent the Morthek stampeding toward the crystal formations where Marcus waited, concealed and ready. A single shot through the dominant males, I dropped the creature instantly, while the rest of the herd thundered past his position without ever detecting his presence. Marcus had learned to hunt like both predator and human, combining the patience and territorial knowledge of Keth Mora's apex predators with technology and tactics that no alien species had ever encountered. But his greatest adaptation hadn't been physical or tactical. It had been psychological. The galaxy saw humans as weak, soft creatures that require protection and perfect conditions to survive. Marcus was learning that the opposite was true. Humans were adaptation specialists, creatures capable of thriving in environments that would kill most galactic species. Earth itself was proof of that high-gravity death world with extreme weather, dangerous fauna, and atmospheric conditions that require protective gear for most alien visitors. Every human was a survival specialist, shaped by millions of years of evolution on one of the most hostile planets in known space. As Marcus field-dressed his kill, he reflected on the reports that were undoubtedly being transmitted back to Nexus Prime. Orbital sensors monitored Kethmora continuously, tracking his vital signs and general position. The galactic observers knew he was still alive, but they had no idea what he had become. Admiral Siskar and his supporters probably assumed Marcus was cowering in some cave, barely surviving on emergency rations while counting down the days until his inevitable death. They couldn't conceive of a primitive creature actually thriving on Kethmora, learning to hunt its apex predators and claim territory in one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. That evening, as Marcus prepared Morthek steaks over a carefully concealed fire, he was interrupted by a sound he had never heard before on Kethmora, the harmonic singing of void crawlers in broad daylight. According to the archives, void crawlers were strictly nocturnal creatures that never emerged from their cave systems during daylight hours. Their appearance now suggested something had changed, either in their behavior patterns or in the local ecosystem that supported them. Marcus extinguished his fire and moved to an observation position, scanning the crystal formations for any sign of the unusual predators. What he saw made his blood run cold. An entire pack of void crawlers had emerged from their underground tunnels, but these weren't hunting in their usual random patterns. They were moving with obvious coordination and purpose, following scent trails and communication patterns that suggested they were tracking a specific target. They were tracking him. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. His survival and hunting activities had attracted the attention of Kethmora's most dangerous pack hunters. Worse, their emergence during daylight suggested they considered him enough of a threat to break millions of years of evolutionary programming. Marcus had become the hunted. The next 72 hours were a nightmare of constant vigilance and movement. The void crawlers pursued him with relentless efficiency, their thermal vision tracking his heat signature even when he managed to mask his visual and auditory presence. Their acid spit made direct confrontation suicidal, and their pack coordination meant that attacking one would bring dozens of others down on his position. But Marcus had learned something during his time on Kethmora. Survival wasn't about being stronger or faster than your predators. It was about being smarter, more adaptable, and more willing to use every possible advantage. The void crawlers' thermal vision was both their greatest strength and their critical weakness. They were so dependent on temperature differential that they had difficulty operating in environments where heat sources were confused or masked. Marcus began using this against them, creating false thermal signatures with heated rocks and chemical reactions from local vegetation. More importantly, he discovered that the void crawlers' underground tunnel systems followed predictable geological patterns. The crystal formations that dominated Kethmora's landscape were actually the surface manifestations of a much larger crystalline matrix that extended deep underground. The void crawlers used this matrix as a highway system, but it also meant their movements could be predicted and countered. Marcus spent 2 days mapping tunnel entrances and exit points, identifying choke points where the pack hunters would be forced to emerge in predictable patterns. He prepared ambush positions with carefully placed explosive charges and fields of fire that would maximize casualties while providing him with multiple escape routes. The confrontation came on day 18. Marcus had positioned himself in a crystal formation overlooking a major tunnel intersection, one that the void crawlers would have to use to continue their pursuit. His rifle was loaded with armor-piercing rounds that could penetrate even their acid-resistant carapaces, and he had prepared incendiary devices that would collapse tunnel entrances and limit their ability to maneuver. The pack emerged just after dawn, 53 individuals moving in perfect coordination through the crystal maze. Their leader was a massive female with scars indicating numerous territorial battles, her thermal sensors sweeping back and forth as she searched for Marcus's heat signature. Marcus let them advance into the killing zone he had prepared, waiting until the entire pack was committed to the open ground before triggering his ambush. The first explosive charges collapsed tunnel entrances behind them, cutting off their retreat. The second set created confusion and casualties in their midst. Then, Marcus began picking them off systematically, one precise shot at a time. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Void Crawlers were incredibly intelligent opponents, quickly adapting to Marcus's tactics and attempting to flank his position through alternate routes. But Marcus had spent days preparing this battlefield, and every move they made had been anticipated and countered. When the last Void Crawler fell, Marcus was alone in the crystal clearing, surrounded by the corpses of Kethmora's most feared pack hunters. His ammunition was nearly exhausted, his body pushed to the limits of endurance, but he was alive and victorious. More importantly, he had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. A single individual from a primitive species had defeated a coordinated attack from 53 apex predators in their own environment. The orbital sensors monitoring Kethmora would have detected the battle, recording energy signatures from explosive devices and thermal blooms from the carnage. The reports reaching Nexus Prime would be causing panic among the galactic observers who had dismissed humanity as weak prey animals. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. He had 12 days remaining on Kethmora, and he intended to use them to demonstrate something that would change the galaxy's perception of humanity forever. He wasn't just surviving on this death world, he was conquering it. As Marcus salvaged what he could from the battlefield and prepared to move to a new base camp, he considered what the galactic observers must be thinking. Their primitive, human test subject had not only survived longer than any expert had predicted, but had actively engaged and defeated multiple species of apex predators using nothing but intelligence, preparation, and the kind of stubborn determination that had carried humanity from the caves of Africa to the stars. The galaxy had wanted to test humanity's worthiness to join galactic civilization. Instead, they were about to discover that humanity might be the most dangerous predator species they had ever encountered. The hunt was nearing its end, but the real game was just beginning. Day 28 marked a fundamental shift in the ecosystem of Kethmora. For the first time in millions of years of evolution, the planet's apex predators had begun avoiding certain territories not out of respect for each other, but out of fear of something new. Marcus Chun had become the dominant predator on Kethmora. He stood atop a crystalline ridge overlooking the vast expanse he now considered his territory. Nearly 50 square kilometers of death world that he had claimed through cunning, violence, and the absolute refusal to be defeated. Below him, the various predator species that had once hunted freely now moved with obvious caution, their ancient instincts warning them of a new threat in their environment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After his victory against the Void Crawler pack, Marcus had systematically eliminated or driven off every major predator in the region, not through random violence, but through careful, calculated campaigns that demonstrated his understanding of each species' psychology and behavior patterns. The Skelvrak had been relatively easy once Marcus understood their territorial nature. These massive reptilian hunters were solitary creatures that claimed vast hunting grounds and defended them against all intruders. Marcus had simply made it clear that his presence was a permanent fixture in their territory, one they could neither drive off nor eliminate. After killing 3 more Skelvrak in carefully planned ambushes, the remaining specimens had begun avoiding areas where Marcus's scent markers were detected. They had learned, through the most basic of evolutionary pressures, that challenging this new predator resulted in death. The Thornlings had required a different approach. Their coordinated route networks made them nearly impossible to eliminate individually, but Marcus had discovered that their coordination was also their weakness. By introducing controlled fires at key network nodes, he could disrupt their communication across vast areas, leaving isolated groups vulnerable to systematic elimination. More importantly, Marcus had learned to use the Thornlings' own tactics against them. He began cultivating certain aggressive plant species in strategic locations, creating natural barriers that would funnel other predators into ambush zones. The planet's ecosystem itself became his weapon, turned against creatures that had spent millions of years mastering its secrets. But it was his psychological warfare against the aerial predators that truly demonstrated Marcus's evolution from prey to apex hunter. The Skethwings were massive flying creatures with wingspans exceeding 40 feet and the intelligence of Earth ravens. They had dominated Kethmora's skies for millennia, using their aerial advantage to hunt prey that ground-based predators couldn't reach. Marcus had turned their own superiority against them. Using salvaged materials from his drop pod and components harvested from his various kills, Marcus had constructed what appeared to be a crude but effective surface-to-air missile system. The weapons themselves were relatively primitive, basically guided rockets with explosive warheads, but their psychological impact was devastating. After Marcus brought down the first Skethwing, the others had begun exhibiting behavior that orbital observers described as unprecedented aerial anxiety patterns. The sky hunters that had never known fear were suddenly terrified of flying over certain areas, their ancient confidence shattered by the realization that the sky was no longer a safe refuge. By day 25, Marcus had established complete dominance over his chosen territory. Predators fled at the first sign of his presence. Prey animals grazed peacefully in areas he had cleared of threats. The ecosystem itself had begun adapting to accommodate its new apex predator. But Marcus's greatest achievement wasn't his mastery of Kethmora's fauna. It was what he had become in the process. The human who had arrived on this death world 28 days ago had been formidable by Earth standards, a trained Marine with combat experience and survival skills. The creature that now stood atop the Crystal Ridge was something else entirely, a perfect fusion of human intelligence and alien world adaptation. His body had been transformed by the high gravity and hostile environment. His muscles were denser, his reflexes faster, his sensory perception enhanced by constant exposure to life or death situations. The crushing gravity that had initially threatened to cripple him now felt natural, even comfortable. His mind had undergone an even more dramatic evolution. Marcus thought like a Kethmora predator now, understanding ecosystem dynamics and predator psychology at an instinctive level. He could predict weather patterns by observing plant behavior, track creatures across terrain that left no visible signs, and identify potential threats from minute changes in environmental sounds. Most importantly, he had developed something that no galactic predator possessed: the ability to adapt his hunting strategies based on technological innovation and creative problem-solving. Where evolution had locked other species into fixed behavior patterns, human intelligence allowed Marcus to continuously evolve new tactics and strategies. The orbital observers monitoring Kethmora had been transmitting increasingly frantic reports to the Galactic Council. The primitive human test subject was not only surviving his trial, but had apparently established territorial dominance over one of the most hostile environments in known space. Admiral HFY Sci-Fi's confident predictions about human weakness had been replaced by growing alarm about potential human capabilities. The betting pools on Nexus Prime had long since closed, their parameters shattered by Marcus's unprecedented performance. On the morning of day 29, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. He was conducting his usual dawn patrol when his early warning systems detected an approaching aircraft. Not one of Kethmora's native flying predators, but an artificial construct using technology far beyond anything the planet had produced. The vessel was sleek, crystalline, and obviously Ashani in design. It landed gracefully in the clearing Marcus had designated as his primary camp, its energy shields shimmering in Kethmora's triple sunrise. Council Speaker Veltar emerged from the craft, her crystalline form refracting the morning light into spectacular patterns. She was alone, which spoke either of tremendous courage or complete confidence in her safety. "Human Marcus Chun," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance despite Kethmora's thin atmosphere. "I come speak with you before your trial period ends." Marcus approached cautiously, rifle ready but not directly threatening. After nearly a month on Kethmora, he trusted nothing and no one completely. "Honored Speaker," he replied, stopping just outside conversational range. "I didn't expect a personal visit." Veltar's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. "Few expected you to survive long enough to warrant one. Your performance has been illuminating. Has it changed anything?" Marcus asked. "The Council's opinion of humanity?" "Everything has changed," Veltar said softly. "The galactic powers are having emergency sessions. Admiral HFY Sci-Fi has called for immediate military assessments of human capabilities. Some council members are demanding that Earth be quarantined as a potential threat to galactic stability." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Kethmora's harsh climate. "Because I survived your test?" "Because you conquered it," Veltar corrected. "Marcus Chun, in 29 days on Kethmora, you have achieved territorial dominance over apex predators that have ruled this world for millions of years. You have demonstrated technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and psychological warfare capabilities that no galactic species possesses." She paused, her crystalline form seeming to dim slightly. "Some council members now believe that humanity is not a weak prey species seeking protection, but a predator species that has been concealing its true nature." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Humanity's future in galactic civilization hung in the balance, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of proving worthy of acceptance, he might have proven too dangerous to be allowed freedom. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on you," Veltar replied. "In 18 hours, your trial period will end, and you will be extracted from Kethmora. The Council will then vote on humanity's status in galactic civilization. The options range from full membership and recognition to preemptive military action against Earth." Marcus stared at the alien leader, understanding finally dawning. "You're asking me to throw the fight, to fail the test deliberately so humanity appears weak and harmless. I'm asking you to consider the consequences of your success," Veltar said. "Your species' survival may depend on appearing less capable than you actually are." For a long moment, Marcus considered the choice before him. He could activate his emergency beacon, claim system failure or injury, and return to Nexus Prime as a failed but valiant representative of a harmless species. Humanity would be classified as a protected race, but they would be safe from galactic fear and suspicion. Or he could complete his trial successfully, proving human capability, but potentially triggering a preemptive war against Earth by species terrified of humanity's potential. "Speaker Veltar," Marcus said finally, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course. In your personal opinion, do you believe humanity deserves to be free?" The crystalline being considered his words carefully. "I believe," she said slowly, "that any species capable of what you have achieved deserves the right to determine its own destiny." Marcus nodded, his decision made. "Then, I'll see you in 18 hours, when my trial period ends." Veltar's form brightened with what Marcus had learned to recognize as respect. "I hope the Council makes the right choice." After the Ashani leader departed, Marcus spent his final day on Kethmora putting his affairs in order. He cached weapons and supplies in hidden locations throughout his territory, documented his observations about predator behavior and ecosystem management, and prepared detailed tactical assessments for potential future human operations on Death Worlds. Because Marcus Chun had realized something that the Galactic Council was only beginning to understand. Kethmora wasn't humanity's test, it was humanity's training ground. Every human who survived this world would return to Earth changed, evolved, and exponentially more dangerous than when they had left. The galaxy's death worlds, intended as prisons and execution sites, would become humanity's military academies. The Council could vote to accept humanity as equals, attempt to subjugate them as protected pets, or try to eliminate them as a threat. But they could no longer pretend that humans were weak, harmless creatures unworthy of respect. As Kethmora's 3 sons sat on his final night as the planet's apex predator, Marcus Chun smiled grimly and prepared to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The hunt was ending, but the war for humanity's freedom was about to begin. When the extraction ship arrived exactly 30 days after his insertion, they found Marcus Chun waiting for them at the designated pickup coordinates. He was calm, confident, and completely unharmed. Around him, the death world of Kethmora showed clear signs of ecological management. Predator populations controlled, prey species thriving, and territorial boundaries established through superior force and tactical intelligence. The human had not just survived the ultimate test. He had mastered it. The galaxy would never be the same.